Welcome to UberCube. This is the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, and his partner in crime, co-host,
Just
Stu. And before we even get into the topic, which we're going to discuss, well, you know what? Let's go ahead and crack into it. Let's give a little teaser.
I like it.
It's going to be the Old Gnaw Bone Method, and that was developed by Dr. Wilsey, our regional dragonologist.
He is.
But before we get going into the topic at hand, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy a little libations.
It is. It's a classic.
Yep.
I've talked about this a few times, and it's a Guinness. It's a can. It's a draft stout. It's nectar.
And to make it a little bit more interesting, it has the nitrogen card at the bottom, so we can get that little.
Does.
Yeah, we get that little gurgle that
In the
scares
UK,
you.
we call that the
Yes.
widget.
And I will give a disclaimer. Be careful with this particular one around your cards, as the nitrogen card, not our fault here at UberCube.
Yeah,
But
don't open cans of anything near the table.
There
right?
you go.
That's a life lesson.
Let's go ahead and crack this. Yep. You hear that? Yeah, that's that little night card going
Listen
off.
to that.
Oh man, this.
I even brought up glasses and everything for these things.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pour mine in glass. I'm
Oh,
not gonna. I'm not gonna be. What do you call a glass or a fish with no
A fish.
with no eyes? Well, what do you call a fish that has glasses on? Sophisticated. I'm not gonna be that today. All right, so we're gonna move
Let's
on.
avoid the dad jokes from now on, if you will.
Let's move on to the topic at hand. The Old Gnaw Bone Method. So let's start by setting a pretense. Stu, what does Old Gnaw Bone do?
So, Old Gnaw Bone is a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big one. It's 5 colorless, 2 green for a legendary creature dragon. It's a flying 7/7, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. I will say, right, I'm going to put this out there straight away. The first time I read this card, I was incredibly underwhelmed with it, right? Because the first time I read it, I looked at it, was like, oh man, it has to deal combat damage to create treasure tokens. That's, I don't know about that. But it is actually any creature you control. It's a creature, not this creature. So it's not quite as terrible.
It's not. But we're going to use this as the gold standard coined by our Dr. Wilsey, our regional dragonologist.
He is. And I want to give him a shout out. We actually mentioned him on Twitter quite recently because we had the pleasure of drafting his most wonderful mono white cube, and that was a hell of a lot of fun. We actually played together, David and I, first round. It was life gain versus life gain, and the match probably went on about 3.5 hours, but
Absolutely.
That is a wonderful, wonderful cube. It's up on Cube Cobra, if I remember.
I'm going to be
correctly.
sharing in the show links because it is fascinating that he has extrapolated archetypes from mono white. So we're going to, in the future, we're going to cover monocolored cubes, focusing on that cube and branching off on how you can derive archetypes from, like Stu said, life gain, knights, etc. There's all kinds of stuff.
Tribal's obviously fairly easy, even if you're just monocolored across your cube. But you still have to make them interesting, right? You can't just throw every card of a creature type in there. Maybe you don't have enough. Maybe you need to sort of, delve away from that a little bit.
Yeah. So we were discussing with our good friend David, Dr. Wilsey, about our interest in doing a pod on dragons. So we wanted to talk about how a methodology that we could use to basically not only showcase them, but to parse them out, delineate them from one another, kind of put them in silos, if you will.
Yeah.
And we're going to work on that. But the gold standard that we're using doesn't seem so gold in the ticket because Old Gnaw Bone is found in exactly 1% of cubes in Cube Cobra. Yeah, so we're going to use that.
Underrepresented.
So we've got some base questions that we kind of talked about before we even begin working through this. And as we move through these questions on how we're going to use this, we're going to give our system. Then we're going to talk about what inspired this episode, et cetera, how Stu and I came about, what we thought would be pretty cool to talk about.
Interesting topic, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to start by using the Old Gnaw Bone method to gauge basically the power of dragons.
Right.
And it's going to be kind of the Baneslayer method, if you will, but, obviously for a whole different creature type. Yeah. So questions that are going to be asked, for instance, is the dragon impactful when it enters the board? ? Does the cost translate to the effect which it provides? Win more versus is it needed, utility, etc.
It's one of my favorites right there.
Right.
Yep.
Is it a finisher? And finisher and Winmore get really close hand.
Yes, they do.
That's a neck and neck idea, right? The next one is environment dependent. So Old Gnaw Bone, for example, it's exceptionally powerful in a low powered environment, or if you have a D&D type cube, which we'll talk about and I'll share in the show notes, that features this type of dragon, then yeah, it's amazing. It translates from Winmore into a win con pretty quickly, right?
Yep.
Whereas maybe in a vintage environment, it may fall a little behind, but the card is still yet powerful. And then the big question, as far as dragons are concerned, using this method, is what archetype does a dragon support? You know, where does it fall in? And then the big one, Stu is going to ask this question here is
are you judging, sweet listener, are you judging this card or any other dragon? And really you can extend this point out to a heck of a lot of other cards. Are you judging this as an EDH player, or are you judging this as a cube curator or as a cube drafter, right? There's a very, very different brain that is needed when you're really engaging with, you know, either curating your cube versus building an EDH deck, totally wildly different environments. You've got to be able to separate what is determining the power level of a card in an EDH deck versus how powerful is a card in a cube. And again, as we've discussed many times, we're not talking about necessarily a vintage cube environment, which a lot of people are very familiar with. You talked about a D&D cube. This might be amazing for a D&D cube.
Right.
It might be amazing for a mono green cube, but
it's almost like a self-test that you have to do for yourself. Not only as a curator, but as the drafter.
You've got to be able to leverage the power of the cube versus the power of the creature.
Yes, and this actually falls into when you're giving not only feedback, but when you're designing as well. What is your inspiration? Is it based on your commander expectations of how a card should perform, where you may have, in an example we had last night, we're on turn 37, at least it felt that way, versus in a powered environment, you've got turn 3, right?
Yeah.
So it's a whole way of analyzing stuff. But so if you're looking 40,000 feet at a dragon, you have to then make a decision, is this great in commander? Or is this great in a cube?
Yeah, and also
it's a fundamental.
It's also I'm also sort of guilty of sort of recency bias from time to time. And one thing we actually talked about this on one of our previous episodes was the push of treasures in recent Magic sets. Right? There's been this massive like flood of cards that create treasures in, you know, and like I said, in a couple of the most recent sets. The most popular probably Ragavan. Would this be a card because it does interact with treasures, or at least allows you to create them? Would you think, oh man, treasure support, it's a whole new thing in, you know, not necessarily in Magic, but a whole new bunch of support for it in a new set?
Yeah, the treasure thing's kind of a Tolkien idea, you know, George R. Martin, kind of, you know, dragons protect, you know, the treasures. A bunch of monkeys running around treasures. Like, he got away with it because he had a pirate, you know, that's it. Right. He's an official pirate.
That's right.
All right, so let's talk about what inspired this episode, because this matters. This is what, you know, Stu and I use to brew these type of ideas.
That's right.
Recently, I was doing a pack one, pick one on the MTG cube draft. It's basically on a Facebook page that I'll share in the link that we absolutely love. And I came across this D&D cube. And amongst those cards, I just saw this one card in particular, and it was Tiamat. Tiamat literally just reminds me of my favorite Saturday morning cartoon when I get up and I'm eating my bowl of Cocoa Puffs and I'm, you know, just not wanting to wake
Grahams,
Golden Grahams. Golden Grahams are amazing. Not wanting to wake the parents, and I would watch basically Dungeons and Dragons, which was an amazing show. Aside from Thundercats and G.I. Joe. Don't want to overstep.
Thundercats, yes.
Yeah. So this whole Tiamat thing just said, you know what? This is awesome. And then it kind of just brought back this whole, you know what else reminds me of that? When I started in the Air Force, kind of told this in one of our earlier episodes, Shiv and Dragon. That was my antithesis to the Sarah Angel. I went out and bought all these bad boys at one point, and we joked about it. It was worth like, I don't know, guesstimated $45-50, and maybe severely overstating that.
I wonder how many people traded like Black Lotuses and Moxen and
I'm
Bullland
certain that it has in fact happened. But so Shiv and Dragons, Tiamats, and I'm like, you know what? Stu, let's do an episode about dragons.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move on. We're basically going to go through a system that we're going to look at dragons. We're going to evaluate them. We're going to wonder where they're at in the cubes. And we're going to reflect upon Shiv and Dragon. This is a little bit of sadness on the stack here. That's played in 3% of cubes out in the world, which is basically 1,684. I mean, it beats the Old Gnaw Bone Method, I guess.
It does. I kind of feel that there's maybe
just based
some
on stats alone.
Like, some romanticism about Shiv and Dragon, because it's such an iconic card in the history of Magic, right? If you wanted to build a cube and it was, cards that have somehow fit in with the history, right? That have been so iconic throughout all the almost 30 years now of Magic. Shivan Dragon's going to be
as much as I wanted to call this the Shivan Dragon method. Old Gnaw Bone for me just set like a standard of the apex of how far do you really want to go to play a dragon, how hard do you want to try, because we're going to use that as an evaluation technique, because as Stu and I talked about before, Old Gnaw Bones, this is my personal opinion, and this does matter as to which environment in which you curate it in.
Sure.
Feels win more to me.
Yes.
But in an environment that hosts it, like a D&D or some kind of like the Fey Cube, which we'll cover in the future here, those type of cards make a lot of sense.
Yep.
Whereas if I take this same card and I try to translate it into my artifact cube, not only does it feel Winmore-ish, but it almost feels a little bit dangerous to the environment because too many treasures could be toxic to the environment.
Yeah, especially from an archetypes perspective as well, right? If you do have some way where you're thinking, okay, I've got a green archetype and it cares about artifacts. Obviously, the artifact cube, everything cares about artifacts, but then start to, again, sort of
it can get out of control.
And sort of spread the love a little bit where, do I want to bring in a card that's so strong, right? And Old Gnaw Bone isn't a strong card in a vacuum, right?
No.
But in a much more powered down environment, 7 mana might not be unachievable. It might be very easy to get to. Do I have to really look at a card like that and think, do I want this to become a problem to the point where I want to start thinking about taking out again? Like that would kind of be a bit of a feel.
That's when we talked about in our armies in the can. Sometimes it's better to go 40,000 feet in the air, look at the cards, and try to silo and bucket them based on not only on, hey, I make a token, hey, I make a treasure, hey, I'm a 7/7 flyer or whatever, but rather, what does it objectively do? Like when you go granular on it, what archetype is not only going to fit into, but what type of what is that going to do to the health of my environment?
Exactly.
You have to ask a lot of questions as a curator and as and the big one is this going to be the 23rd pick all the time?
Yes.
I mean, on that subject, you have to watch your drafters.
It absolutely will be. And I would say that when I pick up a card like that, right, I'm looking at that as a 7/7 flyer.
Right.
Are you really looking at that to think I can get all my creatures to create a bunch of treasure
because
tokens?
it requires
Probably
you
not.
to have those creatures, and then it has to be sustainable, has to live, doesn't have haste. And we're going to use that, and you're going to hear more of this in the evaluation of how we subgroup these. So we're going to move over to our next area. And so Stu and I went through, and we individually ranked the dragons on our own, then we compared them basically to the top dragons as per the order of Cube Cobra.
Kind of shows where our minds are at as far as like
and we did this in a blind methodology. We went through, and I just said, hey, Stu, make a list. I want you to categorize these how you see they may fall in an objective order. So we're going to start with as Cube Cobra based on how many cubes they are found present in. And number 1 is going to be Glorybringer. And we're going to talk about this this creature a lot this evening. And for 3 colorless and 2 reds, you get a creature dragon flying haste. You may exert Glorybringer as it attacks. When you do, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls for a 4/4 dragon. And exerts when it taps and doesn't untap and all the things.
Yes.
So this card is going to be kind of the epitome of what we're going to use as the official gold standard. When I was benchmarking Old Gnaw Bone before, I'm going to use that as the Baneslayer versus, if that's fair, because Baneslayer is Baneslayer is an amazing card.
Sure.
Historically.
Yes.
Some of these cards have gotten categorized, even got names attached to them. So when people do card evaluations, they call them a Mole Drifter. They call them a Baneslayer.
Yeah.
So what Stu and I are looking is to get a little coinage here on the Old Gnaw Bone Method.
Right.
But it's going to be very particular to the dragon class. When it comes out, what does it do?
Yeah.
Is it going to change the battlefield? Is it increase the fun factor? Is it going to try to win too much? Is it going to break your environment? These are all the questions you're not only going to ask as a cube curator. And while I do imagine that your drafters will ask a lot less questions, you still have to think about this. You're a game designer.
The curators have to think about it.
You're a game designer. It's not, your drafters are inadvertently going to try to break the game.
Yeah. And I will say that to me is why Glorybringer deserves its spot at the top of the list, right? It's a 4/4 creature, right? By itself, it wins in 5 turns, which is not insignificant, right? It has haste, it has flying, so the evasion plus the fact that you get to swing with it the turn it comes down, very, very strong, right? When you attack with it, you can exert it, deal 4 damage to a target creature, right?
Right. Very
4
powerful.
damage I would say the more powerful your cube is, the more that 4 damage to a creature an opponent controls becomes more relevant. The more powered down the cube becomes,
I would agree
then
with that.
probably the more sort of big plays are going to be the swingers,
Yeah,
right?
so it's
the
going to be the
7/7s,
efficiency
the 6/6,
of
the 5/5s.
Yeah,
exactly. So you're going to have a much better time when you're trying to bring Glorybringer down. And hey, if I'm bringing down Glorybringer with a Black Lotus and a Mox and a Mountain, but I'm taking out my opponent's... So that's one of the things that I love about this card, right? It works so well in a strong environment, right? Or sorry, in a weak environment, it works very well because it swings for 4 damage and it swings the turn it comes in. And you have that ability to exert it if necessary. Maybe you're killing, a mana dork if it's something that may be getting out of control. But certainly in the high power environments, you're being able to take out your opponent's Dark Confidant.
Yeah,
or, something that's giving your opponent either some kind of persistent value or is threatening to become a problem, right? Raphaelos, something along those lines.
We're going to put this at the top tier, as did Cube Cobra.
It's S.
Right.
It's
S tier. So versus Old Gnaw Bones in that method,
yes.
You can see where we're coming from. Mm-hmm. All right. So the next we're going to move on to is going to be Dragon Lord Atarka, and that's going to be the number 2 slot as far as Cube Cobra is concerned. For 5 colorless and Gruul, you get a legendary creature, Elder Dragon. It's flying trample for an 8/8. When Dragon Lord Atarka enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponents control. Now, as you can see, it's very it has a lot of synergies or ideas that correlate to the Glorybringer because it's removal on its deck.
Yes, it is.
It's a beater. Granted, it doesn't have haste. But what it does is it fixes with some form of evasion on top of evasion with trample. It counters that, and that's why it's got the number 2 slot, in my opinion.
Yeah, you couldn't have haste on this creature because
it would be busted.
Well, think about it, right? Glorybringer's 5 for a 4/4. This is 7, right? So it's only 2 mana more for an 8/8 that is potentially going to be devastating for your opponent.
When you drop haste on this, you basically like Hellkite Overlord, which gets into the Jund colors. Yeah. They have to do that to make it harder to cast.
Exactly.
Right? And so Stu's going to cover the next one that's number 3 on the list.
So this is Sprite Dragon, 1 blue, 1 red, flying haste for a Fairy Dragon 1/1, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Sprite Dragon. This is a solid card. Right. Saw some constructed play for quite a while. I like this card. Feels to me that if you're making a Spellslinger deck, is it? Or,
I wonder if the prevalence...
Would you, I don't know if that's
being number 3
like
on the list, and this is number 3 based on how many cubes it's found
a little bit higher.
It's not so much it's not so much a ranking system, so much as prevalence in cubes.
Sure.
Okay, so I mean we could correlate affordability, peasant cube environments, jank environments, thematic environments, whatever. So this is more of just, this is an objective. This is just based on quantity.
100%.
At the end of the day, right? But the card's powerful, right? And we're going to talk about it more as we move along the list. Mm-hmm. The next one is going to be Thundermaw Hellkite, which is going to be for 3 colorless and 2 mountains. You get Creature Dragon for 5/5, flying haste. When Thundermaw Hellkite enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature with flying your opponent's control. Tap those creatures. Mm-hmm. This one we talked about in our Wildfire episode. I mean, that 5/5 is not irrelevant at all. The fact that it has haste, evasion, all the things. And then it actually gets that 1 damage in on your flyers, even if it doesn't kill them.
So obviously very relevant. Comes in, deals 1 damage to each creature with flying, right? So you're not going to hit Dark Confidant, you're not going to hit Thalia,
but you will hit Lingering Souls. You can move those things out of your way. Because that's the whole point of that card. Yeah, that whole
hit a Sprite Dragon if you're really lucky.
You're really lucky, and they don't. Yeah. If you got a blue player that's not doing anything, you may get lucky. The next one, and this one's actually the number 5 on the list. And again, this is quantity, and this is my opinion, not quality, but this is representative of how many are out there in the world, is Niv Mizzet Perun. This is for basically 3 blue and 3 mountains, or rather 3 islands, 3 mountains. You get a legendary creature, Dragon Wizard, 5/5. This spell can't be countered. Flying. Whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet Perun deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card. This one, Stu and I talked about this one. This one kind of stymied me a little bit. I'm not certain why this is so high on the quantity.
I'm not either.
I think this is a very commander-ish, and it's a struggle. Agree. It's a struggle to even cast this. I built this as a commander deck a long time ago, and while it could be potentially very powerful, you're not getting that on turn 6 in Commander. I mean, those colors are brutal. Those are brutal.
Yeah, 3, that is really, really intense. So I agree. It has some nice things. Can't be counted. Is okay. It's a flying 5/5. That's great.
Right.
Whenever you draw a card, okay.
I mean, it's all.
How much support are you gonna try and put in there for a card like that? Like, it's great if you've got.
If you have an environment that hosts this, again,
you gotta have a bunch of card drawing there, and you've got to draft it, and you've got to have the mana.
You can reanimate it. You can sneak attack it, I guess, but I'm not sure why. I don't have a good reason as to why. I personally am not in love with this. I think this card's great, but I just have bad memories of trying to run this in Commander.
I think it's a subpar EDH card at best.
It's rough. All right, so we're going to move on to the list, and we're going to compare. That was the Cube Cobra list, right? And Glorybringer took the gold star there, right? Here's my top 5 dragons.
Yep.
And I did this blind as a prerequisite before looking at Cube Cobra. We did an exercise, Stu and I, and we wanted to compare one another's, see where we stood.
We might as well spoiler this right now as well,
yes.
right?
Glorybringer.
Our picks were identical.
Oh, yeah. No, they weren't. They were not identical. Absolutely not. No, you and I are going to diverge ever so slightly here.
All right.
It's going to happen. There's more than one. Whoosh, I'll show. Number 1, Glorybringer for me. Number 2 is going to be Thundermaw Hellkite, which was the number 3 seat as far as
that's
Cube Cobra, quantity-wise. Number 3 for me is going to be Dragon Lord Atarka.
This is that too.
And number 4 is going to be Murktide Regent, as per my list.
That's right.
And then my number 5 is going to be Timeless Dragon, which we're going to cover these extensively. For my honorable mention, I did toss in Steel Hellkite because that card is near and dear to my heart, exceptionally splashable. Stu, do you want to just cross-compare your list that you came up with? I'm certain those lists did not align perfectly.
All right, not perfectly. I also had Glorybringer as number 1. My number 2 was actually Dragon Lord Atarka. Number 3, Thundermaw Hellkite. Number 4 was actually Steel Hellkite.
Yes.
And then number 5 was Murktide Regent. Murktide Regent is... I love it. Love the card. I think it's a great design. Almost a little bit pushed with the delve. But it's one of those rare, maybe not too
We talked about it before.
It's a great constructed and a great cube card. It's not overpowered. It needs some setup in a cube environment. Much easier, obviously, in a constructed environment where you can fill your deck with cantrips, ponder, brainstorm, consider, things like that. But still has the capability to be.
And then your honorable mention was Sprite Dragon.
And my honorable mention was Sprite.
All right. So as we progress through this episode, those cards we just listed off, they're actually going to be, we're going to do categorization. But before we do that, I thought it would be, we've had 2 sets that have rolled out recently. We've had the new Commander Legends set that just came out and gave us a host of dragons that we're going to talk about. And then we had Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that came out recently that also brought us some dragons. So I didn't think we could just spin right through this without actually discussing some of those.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask that Stu gives off this list here, and then I'll take on the Kamigawa. What do you think?
Sure. So these are the dragons from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, and it's a lot of text. So I'm just going to go through. And we will
share these in the show notes. I think that's fair. We'll go by name now for the time of expediting.
Exactly.
Because it won't translate. But
So in black you have Ancient Brass Dragon, in green Ancient Bronze Dragon, in red Ancient Copper Dragon, in white Ancient Gold Dragon, in blue Ancient Silver Dragon, and in blue-red we have Thurkrag, Cunning Instigator.
Of these dragon types, the 2 that stood out to me personally, and since we've looked at this list, that I have considered for 2 of my environments in particular, Ancient Copper Dragon, which I will read, is for 4 colorless and 2 mountains. You get the Creature Elder Dragon, 6/5, flying. When Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. I'm on the consideration board for maybe my artifact cube, but I have to decide if that's going to be toxic for the environment. I'll have to look and see what kind of finishers I have. But I think that one's worth noticing. At the very least, all these dragons that we listed off by their metal types, they're all great commander cards at the very least.
Yep.
This next one, Ancient Gold Dragon, this one caught my eye early on too in the spoiler season. For 5 colorless and 2 planes, you get another Elder Dragon. But this one's a 7/10. This is massive. And flying, whenever Ancient Gold Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a 1/1 Blue Fairy Dragon creature token with equal to the result. The only thing that's hurt me with these cards, and I'm being completely honest, is the sub game of rolling the dice across the board.
Yeah.
I know people love that. And again, this would be amazing in a D&D. Cube, right?
Agreed.
But as far as introducing that idea and having to bust out a dice and roll it and all that and across the table, it's just more things.
It's what, and
it's a personal choice.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make, right? I'm a Magic player. I don't play D&D. I don't think you do either.
I do
But we
not.
have multiple players in our group that
Correct.
go between the two, right?
Correct.
I really do not like rolling dice in the middle of a game. I'm not really a fan of any kind of extraneous
Unless you got a
mechanics that
mana
I have
crypt, you have zero problems with flipping on your mana crypt. Why is that?
I don't own a mana crypt.
Oh, there you go. Good point. I do.
For this reason alone, I don't want to roll any dice.
Fair enough, yeah.
But yeah, I want to just tap my lands,
Right.
play my spells,
Right.
which is usually island go, because you know how I like to roll.
This is just more me as a player, less as a curator. I just don't like having dice all over the table and all over my cards. And I have some commander decks like that.
Yep.
And I'd be lying to you if I tell you I'm truly enjoying having dice all over my cards that I'm having to flip on top of the cards. And that's just a preference of me personally.
But maybe
I want
this is
clean-
something. Yeah, maybe this is something that is, not a problem. Maybe D&D players are like, hey, I'm
It's
used to
very
rolling
normal
dice
for
while
them,
I'm playing
yeah, right.
games, so I'm fine with it.
Right,
but
where-
to me, this would be a little bit something that I'm not.
But these
crazy about.
cards, those two in particular, the copper and the gold, those two definitely caught my eye. These are all strong, but we're going to move on to the
I think
next.
gold
section.
especially.
I think they're great. I think they do something.
It's a 7/10.
Oh yeah, that's 7/10.
It's a 7/10.
Yeah, that's hard to deal with.
You don't see double digits on
Yeah.
the front or the back side of a creature very often.
Using the old Gnaw Bone test, as we did, every one of these, not only was the dice rolling make us go, groan a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But none of these had haste.
They don't
None of
have
these
haste.
came out. Every one of these required you to basically deals combat damage in that evaluation method. You had to connect, and then the decision was made: was that ability, once it connected, so devastating that it made it worthwhile, or was it win more? So in the case of, I don't know, rolling a d20, if you get 15 tokens of treasure tokens,
Yeah.
does that win more?
It definitely
kinda
is.
feels that way.
And you've got to do something with that mana, right? This is one reason why, look, going all the way back to, early days of Magic and the early discussions, ongoing discussions, probably until the end of time, about the most powerful Magic cards, right? Is Black Lotus the most powerful Magic card of all time, in your opinion?
You're gonna make me say that out loud.
Yes.
I love Soul Ring for the reliability factor.
So, okay, so you would say Soul Ring. I
would.
would say Ancestral Recall.
yeah, okay.
Because cards
that's super tight.
is
though.
always,
Yeah.
in my opinion, Ancestral Recall, and it's not even close, right?
I just always draw
Does it-
3 lands when I do it, man. It's just always
That's a you problem. That's a build a better deck problem. But to me, it's something like that because it's never a bad top deck, right? Anytime I get the ability to create a bunch of mana, I'm not super sad about it, but
Does it
it
win the
necessarily
game?
translate to a win, right?
You have
So
to have
if you-
something in your hand. It has to come out on the field. I get it.
I have to do something
At
with
least that gold dragon, and I know we've gotten hung up on this section.
Just look at the averages.
They
If I
at
create-
least make fairies.
Yeah, if I
and they
roll
can
a
kill
10, which is the average, and I get 10 1/1 flyers,
you're on a timestamp now.
Absolutely,
For real.
that's huge
Okay,
pressure.
that's super powerful. May consider for my 2-headed giant cube because the blocking, I like the beef block around there, and then it just gets in the way of everything.
You know what we should do one day with the 2-headed giant cube? We'll make it. It's the mechanic, and I'm not good with names, but where you can both pay for someone's
assist.
spell. Assist. That's right. We should place one day where assist is just wide open.
Oh man,
Every spell,
every
it's
spell
two-headed
has
giant.
assist.
Every spell has assist.
That would be disgusting.
All right.
Okay, we're doing that.
Today.
All right, so next we're going to go over, and this is going to be a next subcategory, and this is going to be the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and we're going to start putting these into buckets as we move through now.
Mm-hmm.
That's now happening. This is going to be the on death trigger that are going to be, we're going to call them Baneslayer-ish, and we're going to use this in the evaluation using the Old Gnaw Bone Method by our Dr. Wilsey.
So the first one is white, 3 colorless, 2 white for Ao the Dawn Sky, legendary creature, spirit dragon, dragon spirit. Flying Vigilance. When Ao the Dawn Sky dies, choose one. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of non-land permanents with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or put 2+1/+1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle. That second thing, wow, that needs some setup and maybe some real specific archetypes. And the first one...
I missed that.
mana
I missed
value.
that AO. I missed the vehicle part. If I'm being honest with you,
Yeah,
I can make use of
total-
that in some commander. It's very commanderish for
It's
me personally.
totally commander.
It feels very commander for me personally.
But it's got to die.
It does. So all these are going to be on death trigger. Hence
They are.
the title at which we sequenced. Yeah.
Yep.
But the next one is going to be
It's going to be Kyrie, the Swirling Sky, 4 colorless, 2 blue.
read.
Flying with Ward 3. When it dies, choose either return any number of target non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less to their owner's hands, or mill 6 cards, then return up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. I actually really don't mind this one. It does
Right.
at least have some synergy that you can mill and then bring stuff back.
Yeah.
You've got a Spells Matters deck. It can't, it's not too bad. It, at least in this instance, because you go back to AO, right? Putting a couple of plus one counters, whatever. Putting a couple of non-land permanent cards onto the battlefield from your library.
Right.
Yeah, okay, but I'm not crazy about it, right? But you can stack your deck with something like this. You can use cantrips, brainstorm, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I can see that.
You can at least see where you could synergize this with some archetypes.
And then it's got Ward 3, which is powerful. Ward 3
is good.
That's a hot mechanic. I like that.
It is good.
It's it allows interaction within the game Magic, which we talked about in our very first episode talking about swords. I'm going to actually cover this next one. It's going to be Junji, the Midnight Sky, and for 3 colorless and 2 swamp, you get a legendary creature, Dragon Spirit, which is a 5/5 flying with menace. Before I even get going to that, flying and menace alone on a 5/5 is exceptionally powerful.
Yeah.
Not only do you have evasion, but you have evasion to move around those lingering. They must now basically double block with those lingering souls that they're throwing up in front of you.
Does not die to Doomblade.
That is accurate. Thank you so much for that. But again, it has the death trigger like all the rest of them. So when Junji the Midnight Sky dies, you must choose one. Each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or put target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose 2 life. And it does not specify your graveyard, which makes this very powerful.
I kind of feel it would be.
Yeah. For me personally, so far, we're not in powered vintage environment.
No.
We're definitely in thematic cubes. And as far as my personal evaluation, this one here caught my eye for my 2-headed giant cube. As far as each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, that has considerations for me, because that equates to 4 damage, 4 cards. That might be a little OP. I don't know. I have to think about it. But this is a powerful creature. It does a lot of work. I might slot it in.
It's not terrible. I'm not completely in love with it. Discarding 2 cards is nice. I kind of feel that if I could get some recursion on the go, maybe get it coming in. Kind of feel that, if I could find a way to get it into my hand, get it into the graveyard, reanimate it, maybe sack it, something like that. I can see starting to, force my opponent to discard cards a couple of times. Discarding 2 cards is no fun. Discarding 4 cards is really no fun.
Right. I don't know. I might consider it. 2-headed giant type of realm, D&D cubes. I can see this getting a little outside the...
In your 2-headed giant cube,
I think it's be powerful.
I would say if you're facing multiple players, and again... You're doing that when you're playing Commander, but certainly in your 2-headed giant cube, I think forcing both of your opponents to discard 2 cards is pretty strong.
I can see that. No, I'll include my 2-headed giant cube, which is not the subject we're talking about tonight, in the list, though, because that's how I evaluate. When I'm looking at cards as a curator, again, I want to reiterate, I have 5 cubes. Yeah. So every time I'm sweeping even through dragons, and I do love dragons, again, back to my original, I just love Shiv and Dragon. That's what sparked joy in me. So when these lists come out, I look at them and I go, hey, what environment can I place this in? All right, the next one's going to be Atsushi, the Blazing Sky. And for 2 colorless and 2 red, you get a legendary creature, Dragon Spirit, 4/4, Flying Trample. Again, another form of evasion on top of evasion. But a 4/4, I don't know how well that translates. But again, if I'm using Lingering Souls as the battleground in front of me, that will trample over that. And when Atsushi, the Blazing Sky, dies, choose one. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards, or you can create 3 treasure tokens. Now, I feel like that second one, the create treasure, is very flavor text to me. Whereas the first one, I will definitely exile the top 2 cards of my library and try to get card advantage.
Yeah, that's definitely the stronger aspect of this card. Right. The 3 treasures is nice, but
it's strange.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about it.
Pseudo replaces itself for argument's sake. Yeah. I guess you could do something, but I'm not in love with that. That was a strange. Stu, would you mind taking on this next one, please?
Yeah, so this is the last one in this cycle, and it is Kura, the Boundless Sky, for 3 colorless and 2 green. You get a 4/4 legendary Dragon Spirit with flying and death touch, and when it dies you can choose one. Search your library for up to 3 land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle, or create an XX green spirit creature token where X is the number of lands you control.
It's actually pretty powerful, that back end. I actually missed that second part. That XX green, well, granted, no flying, no evasion, pretty vanilla at the end of the day. That's a nice little replacement. If I had to pick that one apart, that's interesting, because
it's not terrible.
If you haven't curved out beautifully, let's pretend, on curve, it's a 5/5 XX green spirit. I mean, it's a good speed bump.
It is, and let's remember that first ability is 3 lands, not 3 basic lands.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You could go and get your Dark Depths and Thespian Stage combo.
I didn't even think about that. Again, this. I think we just turned on our commander brains again, our EDH brains. Is that what just happened here in this? Because Old Gnaw Bones is currently going.
Not necessarily. This isn't a card that I'm going to pick very highly in a draft, right?
Not for me personally.
But if I do have Dark Depths and I do have Thespian Stage,
and
I'm in green. Yes, it's very narrow.
And it has to die, and it's a blocker. I'm not going to slot. So my powered vintage environment, which we talked about in a previous episode, I do run a lands matters package. I would not put this in there for the sake of getting Field of the Dead.
I wouldn't either.
I just don't. But I think it's still great. Again, I think this is very commander-ish.
Field of the Dead isn't a terrible sort of shout out though. You do get three lands.
It's fantastic. Right?
It could be 3 fetches. It could be I said, Thespian Stage.
You don't have
and
to go purely utilitarian.
Exactly.
I get it. All right, so that kind of closes off our death trigger subsection. And the next one's going to be our hasty, kind of they enter the battlefield, they're going to hit the ground running, and this is another subcategory, and most of these are going to fall well within most people's spectrum of what they expect out of a big red stompy deck at the end of the day. It's for a finisher.
Yeah.
Stu, would you very much like to cover the first one?
Yeah, so we've talked about the first two, Thundermaw, Hellkite, and Glorybringer.
Right.
They really don't need any introduction. The third one is Goldspan Dragon, and I don't think this needs a whole lot of introduction anymore. 3 colors,
dragon.
2 red. When it attacks, you create a treasure token, and you can sack treasures to add 2 mana of any one color. Yes, It's only 1 color, but this is pretty strong.
The only reason why this is not in my powered vintage environment because the first 2 knocked it out of the slot. I mean, there's only so many 5-drops you can put in the red section. Right?
I agree.
Whereas in my artifact cube, this is a house.
Yeah.
It's one of the few times where I told you I broke that mold and said I'm willing to put something that produces treasures in there because I thought this was just a fun, exciting card, nice top-end threshold, and does the treasure thing, but doesn't just do it. It doesn't have the win more condition. It's kind of ancillary. I'm quite okay with hitting someone with a 4/4 flying haste, and then the rest of it's just kind of cake.
And it does need a bit of support, right? You're not just you're not creating 4 treasures at a time or 10 treasures, right? You're only creating 1. It is when it attacks rather than deals damage, which is not insignificant. But I really feel to get the most out of this, you need to have created a bunch of treasures beforehand. But again, it's a 4/4 flying with haste. It does damage.
The next one's going to be Storm Breath, a dragon, and for 3 colorless and 2 mountains, you get a creature dragon. I keep saying that over again. Creature dragon. The whole episode's about dragons, guys. Yeah. For a 4/4 flying haste, protection from white, and for 5 colorless and 2 mountains, you get Monstrosity 3, which is basically if you pay that cost, it gets 3/1/1 counters on it and becomes a monster, as if dragons weren't already there,
Dragon
right?
Monster.
And then when Stormbreath Dragon becomes monstrous, it deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. This just does a whole lot of things. I'm only not running this because, again, Glorybringer and Thundermaw Hellkite just do more for what I'm trying to do as a curator, but I can see this card. I feel like you could swap almost all 4 of these cards out at any point in time. I would draft them all and not feel bad about it.
I think that depends on the archetype, or on the cube. I would say I don't think Stormbreath Dragon is vintage cube worthy. I think it's a good card.
Sure.
I don't think it's good enough.
Powerful.
It's a powerful card, but it's not vintage.
And I don't like the pro white.
Exactly. Pro white is it's a bit of gravy, but it's like a teaspoon of gravy. It ain't a ladle of gravy.
It takes off some of the removal.
It's not Thundermaw. It's certainly not Glorybringer.
Correct.
And I would say Goldspan Dragon and Stormbreath, I would kind of put them on the same.
They're on the cusp.
They're on a similar scale on the Old Gnaw Bones.
Right. All right, let's go for the next subcategory, and this is going to be an odd one. This is going to be our Spells Matter section. So we're evaluating using the Old Gnaw Bone system.
Yep.
We wanted to know basically is it worth putting this card, including it, and what environment might you include it in? And was the utility or function or the power strong enough to justify or warranting it coming into the environment? Again, the Old Gnaw Bone system that I am utilizing is in particular for my cubes. You can place these however you wish. Cube community. Right. All right, so the first one is going to be, and this system is going to be the Moonveil Regent. And for 3 colorless and 1 mountain, you get a creature dragon. I'm going to keep saying that to the point where it's painful. And you get a 4/4 flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw cards for each of that spell's colors. When Moonveil Regent dies, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. I'm not in love with it.
It's terrible.
You know what it reminds me of?
It's absolutely terrible.
It's very commander centric.
It needs so much. Like
it's domain. Is that was it called domain? If you had so many colors, you could do a thing. It was basically like an Alara type system or whatever, right? It kind of feels that way. This is a mono red dragon 4/4 at the end of the day. All that other stuff having to do multicolor spells and all that just doesn't really appeal to me.
I don't like this card.
The only thing I could see
Not
neat
in
about
any way,
if I had
shape, or
to
form.
argue, all the thing it would do is make you force people if you were playing something that forced guilds or forced multicolor type builds, and I could see it. The next
I wouldn't
one.
play it.
The next
I wouldn't
one,
play it if it was
don't
a
have to convince me of
Moonveil
that.
Regent Cube. I still wouldn't play it.
Yeah, the next one's going to be Maniform Hellkite, and this one's a little bit more interesting. For 2 colors and 2 mountains, you get a creature dragon 4/4 flying. Whenever you, I'm going to stop now. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a XX red dragon illusion token flying with haste, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast a spell. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. I'm neither here nor there. It's a hit
I
or
wish it
miss
was
for me.
CMC.
I wish they didn't die.
I wish it was CMC.
I feel like
and
you
not
have to
the
have
amount of mana cast.
I'm
that
going to
spell.
switch on that. I'm going to turn off the Cube Brain and turn on EDH, and I would run this with a Sundial of the Infinite so I can actually stop the turn and keep the tokens.
Sure.
That's how Commander Brain's going to work immediately. And then when we have people suggesting cards, like you guys, and I know you're not guilty of this, but when people say, hey, Anthony, you should run this card, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, which brain are you using?
I've said that before.
Please justify your Old Gnaw Bone
I like
Method.
to think that when we have those discussions, I have my cube
You've gotten better at
not
it.
my
You got-
EDH hat on.
You do. You have to keep that on. So the next one is I'm not in love with that to tie that one off. The reason why these first two, that Moonveil and Maniform, the only consideration, the why I thought about them, is simply because they came from the planet Innistrad, and I do have a horror cube, and then that is the only cube I evaluated them for, and they didn't cut the mustard in there for me personally. But if you're running these, I can see running these in a Dragon's cube. I can see running these in a D&D cube, etc. It's just my environments is how we're doing this process. All right. Stu, would you mind reading that next one, please?
Yeah, this is Smoldering Egg, 1 colorless, 1 red, for a dragon egg. So, can I just say egg because everything's a dragon? So
Nope,
it's just creature egg.
It could be a different type of
creature
egg.
dragon egg. It is a 0/4 defender. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of ember counters on Smoldering Egg equal to the to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Then, if Smoldering Egg has 7 or more ember counters on it, remove them and transform Smoldering Egg, and it becomes a 4/4.
Feels very Commander again to me.
Very Commander.
It's cute. It's cute. At the end of the day, if I'm looking at this card, and I even decided to run this, I would run it as a 0/4 wall. And then ancillarily maybe. But why would you want to do that in red anyways? I don't have a reason to want to do that.
No, I want to be aggressive.
Unless you're hiding behind a Spells Matters, I guess. You can hide behind it. You're buying time. So let's talk about the real reason why we came here to talk about Spells Matters. And I'm going to let Stu do.
Yeah, it's Sprite Dragon.
This is Stu's buddy.
It's Sprite Dragon. 1 blue, 1 red. Again, flying haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it.
You do get a Fairy Dragon. I feel like
You get a Fairy
We
Dragon.
have to talk
The
about
art is amazing.
Yeah, this card's
It looks
amazing.
like this. It's got stained glass wings. It's only a 1/1 to start with, but this is a card that can get pretty out of hand.
The size of a pixie, the rage of a Hellkite.
It's way too cute.
This card will be too
It's way too cute to have the rage of a Hellkite.
I actually don't run this card in actually not a single one of my environments, if I'm being honest.
Time to change.
But I need to find a spot for it.
You do,
I
you
kind of
do.
want to tinker around. I got some fun cubes. I can tinker. All right. So the next group we're going to go over is going to be this is going to be the aggro-ish control top ends. These are kind of finishers. And the first one is going to be more of an homage. I don't run this one anymore, but I can't talk about dragons with not talking about the Eternal Dragon. And for 5 colorless and 2 planes, you get a Dragon Spirit flying 5/5. And for 3 colorless and 2 planes, you can return Eternal Dragon from your graveyard to your hand. Play this ability only during your upkeep. I stress the word hand and upkeep. That's a little bit of disdain in my voice.
Yep.
Plane Cycling 2. Now, I did run this card recently, and the next one that I'm going to talk about in Dr. Wilsey's mono white cube, and I beat face with these cards. Not only did I use them for the plane cycling, but I later brought these 2 bad boys to life. Yeah, it's kind of hard. So back to the original argument.
It's a cool card.
Yeah, but the Old Gnaw Bones Method, it's going to have to really take into consideration what environment at which this stands. In his environment, mono white cube, these are just...
They're houses.
They're space beaters.
They're houses.
They're comets.
I will say that going by bread, I picked up every
Yes.
single one of these gigantic, big beaters. Obviously, they all fly. anytime you have a chance to get a big creature like this that has the opportunity to just smash face and win games, especially in any environment where you're kind of limited in what you can choose, right? Themed cubes, anything like that. Though these cards are going to be bombs, like prioritize them.
And the next one is going to be as Wizard does, the direct upgrade for the Eternal Dragon. Unfortunately, it's going to be the Timeless Dragon.
That's right.
They had to even give it a name that kind of went, okay, yeah, sure. And for 3 colorless and 2 planes, you get a creature, subtype dragon, flying, plane cycling, 2. Eternalize for 2 colorless and 2 planes. You can basically bring this creature back as a 4/4, and you get a 5/5 beater. I mean, this card is amazing. I actually run this in my power cube right now. Stu, what are your thoughts on this card? I love it.
I don't dislike it.
Right.
I don't know if I would include it in a vintage cube.
I think you wouldn't plane cycle to go get your Tundra?
No.
And then later bring back a 4/4 beater?
Probably not.
Well, I need to play against you with this. And I'm going to put a Bone Splitter on this, and then I'm going to hit you with a 6/5. Excuse me, a 7/5.
What deck am I playing? What deck am I playing where you've been able to get
you're sitting around
a
waiting.
5-mana creature on the battlefield that doesn't win that turn, that only has flying?
Fair enough.
And doesn't have haste.
I'm in love with Timeless Dragon. I have since retired the Eternal Dragon, but in Dr. Wilsey's
It's a
mono
house.
white cubes,
So
these are
good in
both
that.
bombs.
Yes.
Holy cow. Stu, would you mind taking over this next one here?
Yeah, this is a cool one. This is a number one. This is Icing Death, Frost Tyrant, 2 colorless, 2 white, legendary creature dragon, Flying Vigilance, 4/3. I hate that it's a 4/3. Why is it not a 4/4, man?
Yeah.
When it dies, create Icing Death Frost Tongue, a legendary white equipment artifact. Token with equipped creature gets +2/+0, and whenever your equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls and equip 2. I kind of feel that this is
This is a commander
not
equipment.
very good.
This is I can see I can see this in it's got vigilance, so that does give it a little bit of. I would see this in a
better have vigilance.
artifact centric with an equipment theme that's looking for a creature. I can see that, but for me again, I think this is very commander brainish.
I agree,
and yeah, it's because it's like basically a bone splitter that taps them down. It's neat, but
it's a cool card, and I like to talk about this. I bring this up from time to time.
Right.
The art on this card is absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning art, right? Equipment and white kind of go together well for me.
It does.
And I think if you have, some kind of white plus artifacts, it is a vigilance creature, which has always been kind of a weird thing to me because I don't want vigilance, or I think vigilance and then tapping it to.
Yeah, it's the 3 that makes this awkward.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the back end of the 3 because vigilance, sure, but are you ever going to block with this? It gets super questionable. So having vigilance seems kind of irrelevant. To me.
It does.
It makes the card get thrown. This next one's going to be Kyodai, the Soul of Kamigawa, and for 3 colorless and 1 planes, you get a Dragon Spirits legendary 3/3 flash flying. When Kyodai, the Soul of Kamigawa, enters the battlefield, another target permanent gains control for as long as you control Kyodai. And then for WooBerg...
Gains indestructible.
Indestructible, excuse me. Yeah, you're right. Pardon. Gains indestructible for as long as you control Kyodai. And then for WooBerg, Kyodai gets +5/+5 until end of turn. The only reason why I even considered this card as a curator is because my La Femme Fatale cube. This is a female lore. This is my brother Josh, who will hopefully have on an episode someday, can explain this extensively, how 2 spirits who are both female merged to one another and made this dragon, and that was my justification. And I needed something for my 4 CMC slot.
I like this card.
I think it's interesting.
I like this card. I think the fact that it has flash and then gives another permanent indestructible, that's not bad.
The WooBerg part's not amazing, but so what? It's the flash part. I saw utility.
It's only 4 mana.
Using the Old Gnaw Bone scale,
You get a 3/3 flyer for 4 mana, right? On curve, that's really not bad. The fact that it has flash and gives indestructible to something, I like this
It's a slower environment for the La Femme Fatale. So this was a nice tempo card that also protects your creature. So the utility outweighed the cost and also the fact that it was splashable.
Yep.
Opposed to having double pip like the one we talked about before. Stu, would you mind taking on this next one, please?
So this is the last one in this category, and this is Ebondeath Dracolich, 2 colorless, 2 black. You get a flash flying zombie dragon, legendary, and it does enter the battlefield tapped, which is a little unfortunate, but I think from the abilities you'll see why. You may cast it from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebondeath Dracolich died this turn. I like this card. I really do.
Right.
I think any kind of sack, get it back from your graveyard,
Yeah.
got some other, shenanigans going on.
So it competed with cards. Unfortunately, like this was a horror cube card. Again, consideration for me as a curator.
Yep.
I didn't see this in Power. I actually saw this on MTGO for a little while, and people weren't really into it.
No, not good enough
whereas
for a vintage
though, but it did actually get some buffs and stuff in a horror genre type. If you got something with zombie lords, etc. But that 4 CMC slot is so critical because it has cards in there like Kalidas, which is a vampire I know, or it has the vampire aristocrat or whatever. That it gets into those slots. You have to be really careful with that because I'm supporting other archetypes.
Black in general
didn't have a home.
Black in general, I think for creatures, Ebondeath Dracolich, decent card, not vintage cube, worthy in a horror cube environment. Yes, I think it's a neat card.
As a comparison, though, at least I'll say this dragon knows what it wants to do. 5/2 is not saying I'm non-committal. I'm turning sideways. Whereas the Vigilance one was kind of oddly misplaced. This one says I'm just going in.
Yep.
Yeah, so at least it commits to the bit. So our next category that we're going to move through, these are going to be kind of our sneak attack reanimator targets. We're going to kind of, they're going to be the ones that are going to be a little harder to cast, but not entirely impossible. But if you're running them, it would make a lot of sense. So the first one's going to be Dragon Lord Atarka. And for 5 colorless and Gruul, you get an Elder Dragon, 8/8, Flying Trample. When Dragon Lord Atarka enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage, divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and/or planeswalkers your opponents control. We talked about that before. It's
very strong.
It's strong, but it's also able to be cast. You could naturally cast this.
Yep.
It's not unreachable. A Gruul deck could literally, rampant growth up to this. So I love this card. It's not unachievable. Whereas the next one, Stu, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, this is Hellkite Overlord. So this is 4 colorless, 1 black, 2 red, 1 green. You do get another 8/8, and this one does have haste and flying and trample.
Yeah.
You can pay red as many times as you like to give it +1/+0, and you can pay black-green to regenerate.
Yes, so I would say as a curator, using the old Gnaw Bone Method, which we're continuing to stress, it's just me internalizing, thinking about this. This is one of those traps I fell into. Not only did I want to, at one point, host shards within my powered vintage environment, which became very hard to do, to be honest with you. But this card was almost 100% dedicated to the idea of Reanimator.
Yes.
Right, and Sneak Attack. Which
it's very color intensive.
It didn't have any else to go, whereas
double red.
Atarka at least could be cast. And that if I had to compare these two on just being completely, when you say 40,000 feet when you're talking about a dragon, do you have to go 80,000 feet to talk about the dragon in this? More dad jokes, guys. But you understand where I'm going with this is that I'm looking at these two cards side by side, and I'm questioning why I was running them both at the same time. It's because of all the bells and whistles that the Hellkite Overlord has on it. I mean, it looks shiny and glossy, and it caught my eye as a curator. But also, it didn't take me too long to realize it's a trap. It's undraftable. It only went to a specific archetype. It's uncastable.
It's totally uncastable at 8 mana.
It's brutal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's kind of the EDH Brain versus Curator Brain. Literally, you can see them side by side.
And it's not even legendary.
Yeah, so the next group we're gonna bundle this up as kind of our blue control finishers. This will be kind of a just interesting, and not all of these are going to be powered vintage environment, but these are cards that caught my eye. I'll take on this first one if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
It's going to be Limrith, the Desert Doom, and for 3 colorless and 2 islands, you get a legendary creature.
Dragon.
Yep. Flying Limrith the Desert Doom has Ward 4 as long as it's untapped. Whenever Limrith deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then if you have fewer than 3 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference for a 5/5 flyer. All right. So I had to get into that D&D brain a little bit here. And I was doing this because I talked about this in a previous episode. Like, I like dragons in general, Shivan Dragon, the whole story. You guys get it by now. And every cube, when a spoiler season comes out, I'm looking to see if there's anything I can slot in any of my 5 cubes.
Yeah.
Whether it does something with, I don't know, treasures or artifacts, sure. But this case, that lore, Limrith is actually female. And so I decided to slot this in my La Femme Fatale. So I'm just, because that's a multi-species celebrating all things female out in the world, right? And I just wanted to do something fascinating with it. And this art is gorgeous. She's gorgeous.
Is so
Absolutely.
Insane. This to me is like quintessential dragon art, right? If I think of a dragon in my brain, I'm thinking of this.
Oh yeah, I would not want to see this coming down. But see, this card is just interesting. The Ward 4, again, we talked about in our previous episode,
Underrated.
is amazing.
Underrated.
Like, yeah, I mean, it turns a Path to Exile into, I don't know, some pauper jank at that point. You have to pay 5 to do the thing, right?
Exactly.
It's bad. The next one I'd ask Stu to do, and I'll explain while it's in here, or why it's in here. And it's for budgetary cubes. Go ahead.
Sure. So this is Icefall Regent, 3 colorless, 2 blue for a flying dragon. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature does not untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Icefall Regents. Spells your opponent's cast that target Icefall Regents cost 2 more to cast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so
difficult to deal with.
Yeah,
it's not Ward 2.
It's a Frost Titan.
Sorry, it's not Ward 4, but it's Ward 2.
Frost Titan.
It's Frost Titan that flies.
It's Frost Titan the flyer, right? And I know Frost Titan has poor Frost Titan, right? Of all the Titans, Frost Titan is he's like the cousin they just shut the door on in the family reunion because all the rest of them are eating dinner.
Yep.
Yeah, Icefall Regent's kind of his pet. He's so cute.
Pet, really? I'm not crazy about the art here. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not the most dragonist dragon ever. No. But it's interesting. It does enough. I can see this like if you're doing a powered down version of a cube, you wanted something with evasion. I can see this slotting on a D&D cube. I mean, when I'm referencing all these, I'm doing this from a multitude of perspectives. Again, I have 5 cubes. I have to think about how other people may have more. Right.
And maybe you've got some cube where the archetype is that you're just perpetually trying to keep your opponents tapped down, maybe? Question mark?
Yeah, you could do stuff with this. I mean, it's not horrendous, and yeah, this card's good. It's good enough for most stuff. It's not good enough in a highly powered, synergized environment, but I can see this getting in there for a lot of cubes. And it'll beat you to death. 4 is a clock. It's 5.
We've kind of mentioned that as kind of a passive sort of reference to things that are positive about a lot of these dragons. But let's face it, if nothing else, you do get a big beater. And almost, I think, if not all of them, have flying, right? So, I mean...
Except for that one egg that we talked about.
Exactly, except for the one egg. So, essentially, if none of the other keywords, none of the other text in the text box matters, you're always going to get a beater that can win games.
Flying.
Flies.
It's a thing, right?
It's got evasion. It's got something.
So Stu loves this next card more than me. If you will, I am not in love with this card.
You're not in love with Murktide Regent?
This is going to be our first Why
not?
Well, so Murktide Regent. Let's talk about it. So for 5 colorless and 2 island, you get a creature that is also the same subtype that we've been talking about before, and is a 3/3 delve flying. Murktide Regent enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each instant and sorcery card exiled with it.
Yep.
Whenever instant or sorcery card leaves your graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on Murktide Regent. There's a couple reasons here. This is kind of my first thing, that besides the fact that it's mildly vanilla for me. I know it does a lot of things, but it comes off as vanilla. At the end of the day, you're going to have just a flying creature that doesn't do anything post that interaction, if that makes sense, right? But the fact that it exiles your instants and sorceries is a bit of a turnoff for me too, because while Snapcaster is not my lean in, right, I do want to try to recycle my graveyard if I can.
Right.
Cards like this, and I know it's Delvish, I guess, I know that's what Delve does, but it was very specific that it had to hit instants and sorceries. I couldn't just hit land.
What's wrong with Snapcaster Mage with this card?
Well, you have to hit the instants and sorceries and get them out of your graveyard.
Sure, but it's whenever an instant or sorcery leaves your graveyard. So if I flash back with Snapcaster Mage...
Does it actually trigger based on that?
It should. Judge?
It does, in fact. It does. You're right.
It does.
Yeah, so if you basically get a flashback effect, this gets bigger. Okay.
Exactly.
I didn't understand that. Still don't love this card. But I guess I missed that second. No.
Even with the fact that it's whenever an instant or sorcery?
You're not going to sell me on this card. They're just better cards. If I know that's not a 7 mana value dragon. I get it for 3. It's Delve. They require setup. It requires you to do all these things in order to get that value. So I'm just not in love with it.
I don't completely disagree, but I'm not quite as worried about getting stuff back from my graveyard as maybe I would have thought. At some point, like, I'm not... Can I get Treasure Cruise? Can I get Dig Through Time with this card?
This is trumpable. If I'm going to use Lingering Souls as my blocker here, right, this just gets stymied by all those token effects.
You are, but I'm not going to ignore the fact that you can potentially have an 8/8 beater on the battlefield for only 2 blue mana.
You could.
If I've drafted enough cantrips, enough counter magic, and I can just bang out this 8/8 flyer.
That was the same argument you made in the previous episode about Clarion Spirit. Could you repeat what you just said for the audience, please? You literally made a counter. Go ahead, say it one more time.
I couldn't tell you what I said last time.
You said, if I'm going to cantrip and try to make spirits, and you said all these hurdles, that's hurdles. This is more hurdles.
Not necessarily, because this is much more natural of if I'm building, not necessarily counterspell deck, but if I have any kind of, I want to cast a bunch of spells, right? If I've got any kind of control within the deck, right? A bunch of counter magic, why wouldn't you play a card that for only 2 mana gives you potentially an 8/8 flyer?
Yeah, I can see. You would basically...
And you don't have to play it as an 8/8 flyer.
I guess.
But you could.
I'm not in love with it.
And it could be a 6/6 flyer.
I would rather run Icehold Regent and just make you have to tap it. I'm just not in love with this card.
It's a hard sell.
It's a hard sell.
And then I flash back a counter spell with Snapcast the Mage and put another +1/+1 counter on it.
GG's.
Would you like to concede?
I would like to concede. And I actually added this most recent one because this is one that was represented in the past and has since moved by the wayside. And I felt like we should throw out we can pour one out here on UberCube for this. And it was Kaiga the Tide Star. And for 5 colorless and 1 blue, you get a Dragon Spirit flying 5/5. When Kaiga the Tide Star dies, gain control of target creature. Pour one out for him. Now, I should have put this on the dies trigger earlier because I did have that classification, and I do believe these are all from. Were these all originally from Kamigawa? Even the other ones, Yosei and all those were all Kamigawa, right? So the dies trigger is dies trigger. This is an audience question. The dies trigger, I believe, is associated with that plane. When these huge beaters die, they do a thing.
Right.
That's probably where I guess I overlooked that mechanic. But this card's really great for me in an EDH standpoint. I know at one point people were running this in the way back when in their cubes. This was in powered vintage environments.
Yep.
But this is one of those cards that's kind of diminished because, as Stu mentioned previously, creatures, unfortunately, in environments have become more hyper efficient.
Exactly.
They're getting smaller
Power
as a result.
creep is real.
Yeah. So they're doing more, but they're also smaller creatures, and then wanting to lose a creature to gain a creature is not so prevalent.
There's too many good ETB. There's too many good combat damage. I don't even have to mention the combat damage. There's way too many good ETB effects.
They're burned.
They're super hyper efficient before anything else happens. To have a creature come in and then for it to die. And you gain control of target creature. But what if I'm playing against a deck that really doesn't have any creatures that I'm particularly interested in?
This becomes sideboardish. And then at the end of the day, you have to evaluate this as a 5/5 flyer for 6, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? So then we're going to move over to our next group. And this is going to be the Khans Dragons. And Khans of Takir gave us 2 really sweet dragons that fit in basically the gold sections of a lot of cubes.
Yep.
I've since moved past these, but I feel like these 2 that we're about to talk about, you could easily go right back and forth into no problem whatsoever. They're both powerful. Stu, would you like to take the first one? I think you like it.
I would like to. I'm actually going to do both of these, if you don't mind.
Do it up.
All right. The first one, because I just like this card. This is Dragon Lord Ojutai, 3 colorless, 1 white, 1 blue for a Flying Elder Dragon. Has hexproof as long as it's untapped. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of your library, 1 of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I don't completely hate Dragon Lord Ojutai.
Nah.
One of the things, and we've talked about this with other dragons, it's very, very castable at only 5 mana and not the 6 mana and 7 mana
it's
and
on
sometimes
curve.
8 mana.
So you're using the Old Gnaw Bone scale here, and you're using those questions that we actually placed to it.
Exactly.
And so the cost versus the effect versus what you get out of it, all that makes sense, and it aligns. And then it kind of aligns with what that archetype would want to do.
Yeah.
Because looking at top 3 cards is very much a Azorius thing to do.
Exactly.
So it's checked a lot of boxes here.
Yeah, I've been putting the pressure on either because I'm, controlling things a little bit or, putting some smaller creatures out. Generally, if I'm playing Azorius, I'm trying to play control, right? The fact that it has hexproof as long as it's untapped is so nice, right?
Right.
Okay, I'm going to cast this spell. Go ahead.
Right.
You've got to get rid of this creature. You have to, right?
Yeah, you have to deal with this.
I'm slamming you, first of all, for 5 damage a turn. If I get to untap it and then I get a 5 damage creature that I can start whacking in with, and if I've been able to retain some counter magic, play some card draw, cantrips, whatever the case may be, it's going to do some damage.
I mean, it's a strong card.
Strong card.
The next one, and you said you wanted this one too.
The reason why I wanted to is because this was a card when I first saw it, I was like, man, I'm going to build an EDH deck out of this. This was my EDH brain thinking, and this is why nowadays I don't really rate this card as highly as I used to. This is Dragonlord Silumgar, 4 colorless, 1 blue, 1 black. Flying Death Touch. Death Touch isn't something you see very often.
Right.
When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature or planeswalker for as long as you control Dragonlord Silumgar.
Theft effects are neat.
They're neat.
Stealing someone's planeswalker would be kind of grody. I mean, I'll take your Oko. I'll take your Jace. I mean, I could see that, but I know that also requires all these things to be in place.
Exactly.
This card's very much wanting the magical Christmas land to be happening on the other side of the field for even want to really do this.
I want to cover exactly what you just said, right?
Right.
So it's great if they're on the battlefield. And this is where, let's go all the way back to the old Gnawbone rules with getting away from the EDH Brain versus the Cube Brain, right?
Yeah.
When you've got one player against one player, the number of targets, it rapidly diminishes. You're sitting in an EDH table where you might have 3 other opponents. The possibility that you're going to have one creature that's such a great high value that you're really going to want to do whatever you can to get it, or a planeswalker, that becomes exponentially larger. But in 1 versus 1, the possibility really starts to shrink down.
EDH also turns into a little bit of a fisherman, or a fisher person, rather.
Yep.
And it makes you sit there and wait to get that hook set in on something that so you'll hold, and then you'll throw.
Yeah.
Right? That happened last night. I was playing EDH with my friends, and I dropped an insurrection. But I should have done it a turn before, for example, because it would have been a premium hit. But then I'm like, if I just hold, and I hold. Well, this card is very much screaming that. I want these perfect conditions. Oh, yeah, I want you to do your Jace. So
Absolutely.
I can play this card into it.
Yep.
It's a little
get
bit
your
of,
big Teferi.
It's a little bit fishy, right? It's trying to get that big whale, right?
Yep.
And it'll make you so you'll forget the stats with this type of card that maybe I should just get a Flying Death Touch 3/5 out and start hitting people.
Exactly.
Instead of them going like, oh man, I really hope they play Oko. Right? Which is stupid. It's a stupid way of thinking.
It is stupid because the opponent's playing mono red and you're waiting for an Oko that ain't coming.
But you know what I mean? Like, or Chandra, I don't care. But it's almost like you're trying to bait a hook on something with those odd.
Exactly.
It's less ancillary to the card, more of the reason why you play the card. And that's why I like Ojtai way more than this card. But at one point, I actually ran on both. Sure. That's about all I can really. It covers that.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go down to the next one. We got kind of some strange honorable mentions we're gonna talk about that are unique to environments. The first one we talked about before was Steel Hellkite. This card's still amazing at any class. Right?
I will never dislike this card.
Sure, at the highest power levels, it becomes questionable. But you know
really?
what? Even if I saw it, I'll still draft it.
Absolutely. Because do I have Metalworker and a bunch of artifacts?
Sure. I mean, it comes down to the slot for 6 at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's the only problem with these type cards. Could you run this in a high power environment? Absolutely, 100%. It gets questionable when you start fighting for real estate. And so 6 drops, I don't even know what I'm running in my power adventure environment, but I'll tell you that from my artifact cube environment, this card is a house.
Yes, of course.
And for 6 colorless, you get an artifact creature dragon 5/5. And it's flying. Pay 2, Steel Hellkite does +1, +0 until the end of the turn. So it's basically like a flame breathing or whatever.
Yep.
And then for X, and this is the reason why you run this card.
Of course.
For X, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate only once each turn. This is you can pay 0 into the X and just blow up tokens.
And
that's
again,
we can argue for the old Mall bonds. Would you blow up Mox with this? Probably not, but you could.
Absolutely.
And Mana Crypt.
Why wouldn't I?
You could. Because it really shouldn't be in that environment, in my opinion. I think it's a little slow for powered environments, but
maybe
I can see this being in an unpowered environment and being a house. It gets questionable. It's got nothing to do with how amazing this card is. It has everything to do with what else you're putting in.
The environment that it's in, 100%. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. You would obviously much rather be hitting someone with this and then paying 2 or 3 against, Timmy's mono green deck and destroy all of their mana dorks and,
For 6, I think I'd rather be in Baby Ugin and start doing stuff. And not that I would be, but it's just, there's other cards that are just too
I don't know about that.
Well, I like Baby Ugin a lot.
I don't dislike Baby Ugin.
All right.
You're talking about 7 mana Ugin?
No. We're talking about
You're talking about Baby Khan then?
Talking about 6-drop Ugin. It's Baby Ugin.
Oh, you're talking about 6-drop Ugin.
Yeah. Okay. So the next card, I'm going to have Stu read this one to you, and we'll give a little bit of disdain. It's Niv Mizzet, the Reborn. Would you like to take this one on here?
Yeah, so the next one we're going to talk about is Niv Mizzet Reborn. This is Wooburg for a 6/6 flying dragon avatar. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library for each color pair So fascinating, that one little thing right there.
People love it.
Choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them. Put the chosen cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order.
I need somebody to show me that this is a good card. I think that's cost 1 billion mana without a fist. Without a.
Yeah, I'm here for someone who can tell me why Niv Mizzet Reborn is a good card.
Do you have a?
Oh, he lives next door.
Oh, okay, we'll call you back. All right. You have a Fist of Suns. I mean, what do you have to even make this happen?
Joda, Fist of Suns.
I don't know what
like,
to do
make
with this card.
Things work. Like I don't even know what
I see this. I surprisingly see this on a lot of lists, and I know people are in love with it. And if you're running it,
we'd have to get numbers for this.
Yeah,
we'll put. Here's what we'll do. We'll post this on the Twitter, and we'll look through. We'll look through some cubes where we can see some Niv Mizzet Reborn, and look for maybe ask some people to reach out to us on the socials and tell us why.
I would love for someone to explain to me why they run.
Maybe
this,
in a Woober
show up all the time. Perhaps
is there a Woober?
I've seen this in Power List, and I'm like, I don't know how you're casting that.
But you know why? Because it
enters the battlefield. You do the thing. So maybe you sneak attack. I don't know, man.
You don't run the triumphs.
I do not. I'm not in love with the triumphs. They're too slow.
I know that's because you're completely wrong.
They're goofy guild gates with an extra. I don't need them. They're weird. They're too slow.
Everybody, they're goofy guild gates. If you ever needed to know any more about how Anthony judges cards, he just called the triumphs.
Let me give you the legitimate reason. Okay, we're on the triumph thing. You started it. The reason why I don't run triumphs in my powered vintage environment because I do not want to inspire 5-color decks. 5-color good stuff is already a problem without enabling it. People will sit there and cherry pick cards.
Is it the lands that enable the 5-color good stuff decks, or is it the cards that exist?
It's the cards that exist.
It's not the lands.
You're kicking them over the edge by giving them the better mana base.
What cards? All right, name me 5 cards in any one of your cubes that are so obnoxiously 5-color good stuff that there is a reason why you would prefer to leave cards out. Because let's face it, right? You want people to have fun when they're drafting your cubes, right?
Yeah, they're slow.
What is the worst thing about playing EDH or Cube or any format, any Magic, right? It's not being able to cast your spells. When I'm looking at a card like this, I'm not like exactly the triumphs. I'm not looking at. We're getting way off topic, but I don't care.
We are doing.
We are not. I'm not looking at those as I'm going to use this as an opportunity to play 4 and 5 colors. I'll tell you what I'm doing most of the time. I'm actually looking at them as support for only 2 of the 3 colors, but maybe I'm getting one as a splash. Maybe.
Sure. So why don't you just run shock lands, slow lands, AB duels?
Well, you're already
lands.
running those.
Exactly.
So but now I get an extra cycle.
You don't need more
that
cycles.
Are fetchable.
Yeah, they're not that great.
They're absolutely great.
And then they're a really bad cantrip.
I would like everybody to reach out to us on Twitter and tell me, right, if you agree with me or if you agree with Anthony, I would love to hear it.
You know what? We'll put up a poll. Let's do it.
Okay.
I'll throw it out to the universe.
I'm down.
All right, so we can't move into dragons without talking about, and I know we've been talking about the creature type dragon using the old gnaw bones, but we're gonna have some that are just gonna transcend this idea. This next guy, he's not gonna be evaluated by such methodologies. It's gonna be Sarkin, the dragon speaker. I mean, he talks to old gnaw bones directly.
Yes, he
does.
For
3 colorless and 2 red, you get a planeswalker, and his name is Sarkin, and he starts out with 4 loyalty. His +1 is +1 until the end of turn. Sarkin, the dragon speaker, becomes a legendary 4/4 dragon creature with flying, indestructible, and haste. The next one is going to be the -3. Sarkin, the dragon speaker, does 4 damage to target creature, and then he has some I don't care about, ultimate. The point is that a 4/4 dragon with indestructible and haste is bonkers.
Right.
With 4 damage is your -3. Also bonkers. It's Glorybringer, the prototype.
Yeah, it's Glorybringer.
Yeah, I feel like they were playtesting the idea of Glorybringer.
That's his son, right?
Yeah, this is baby Glorybringer. Yeah. This is his daddy. Right. This card is amazing. I'm currently not running this in my power cube, but I could see where I could actually just wash this back in very comfortably. I mean, I could rotate this with a Koth. I could rotate this with whatever, but granted, it's not going to beat Chandra.
It's definitely a different archetype. I think you're playing,
It's a nice top-end finisher.
It's not bad.
It's powerful. And it survives wildfire because you do it after the fact and then you pop them. It's pretty disgusting.
It is pretty good.
All right, so we can't move through dragons without talking about this one. We're not going to go into explicit details to reading the entire cards, but we'll just say all things Nicobolas.
Nicky B, baby.
He is the OG.
He's the OG.
He's got cards out there. The cube worthiness, they're all over the place. I mean, every spectrum. This card is bonkers. Planeswalkers, and then also the Nicobolas the Ravager, right? I will mention the Nicobolas the Ravager creature side for just, purposes of posterity, but you basically get for some crazy value that's inexplicable. It's one colorless, and Grixis, you get a legendary Elder Dragon 4/4 flying. When Nicobolas the Ravager enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. Very EDH centric in my mind.
Very EDH.
And then you can pay an exorbitant amount of mana. You can flip them over, and that's when they get really gross. Nicobolas is kind of fell into that problem with all the shards that I tried to support at one point, and I felt like I had to have one of each shard represented. I maybe even went further than that.
I kind of feel that
Triomes maybe would make this more supported, but I have no interest in doing that. Back to the original point.
Yeah, I mean, the 4/4 flyer for 4 is nice.
Sure, it's
but
not bad.
Is it
stats.
good enough?
No.
It has to be in a supported cube.
Sure.
Right? He's 4 colorless and 1 blue, 1 black, 1 red, and then exile him and return as a planeswalker. That is a massive, massive investment for something that doesn't win the game. However, the -3 does deal 10 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So if you really, really wanted to destroy that ignoble hierarch or that Birds of Paradise, you can do it.
You have to have a billion mana to do all this. All
but you've got to have a billion.
This card's pretty much. And then we're going to go to our last one, and then Stu and I may have a little bit of a conversation. And it's going to be Eugene, the Spirit Dragon. For 8 colorless, you basically get a legendary planeswalker Ugin. 7 on the loyalty factor. +2, he bolts. -X, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost.
Each permanent.
Permanent. Excuse me.
Permanent.
Yeah, converted mana cost X or less. That's 1 or more colors. So that's pretty much what this card's about. There's a -10 factor on there, but in the terms of dragons, I felt like we couldn't skip through dragons without talking about Sarkhan, Ugin, and Nicobolas. They don't really get the Gnawbone strategies applied to them, the rules, right? But these cards are just iconic for what they do.
I would say that this card...
They're gods.
They're so good.
Right.
It's so good. And it's such a fun card. Not for you. I'm really sorry if I somehow am able to get this down. But it's just such a fun card. The bolt is interesting. Mm-hmm. The exile and the -X is potentially very, very powerful. The -10 to gain 7 and draw 7 and put 7 permanents on the battlefield.
You've already won the game by then.
Exactly. You've won the game by then. But it's a fun card.
Would you channel this out is the question. Would you pay?
No.
I would. I mean, if I didn't have a perfect setup.
No.
I know channel has a lot better targets, but if this was in my hand, I would pay 8 life and drop this. That bolt's not... that bolt's not bad. That -X not bad. You start shutting people down. I mean, it can establish dominance quick.
I'm really hoping that if I've drafted Channel in a vintage environment, that I've done something much, much better.
For instance,
Blightsteel Colossus
there you go.
or Emrakul.
But I thought it was worth annotating. I still love this card. I still run it in my powered vintage environment. Sure. It still does work. I think that the Karns, not to do a comparison, have started to degrade because the mana efficiency has become a factor.
Yep.
But these cards are still fan favorites. I still love drafting them. I'll still do big green and try to get to this sucker. I have zero qualms of busting out an Ugin.
And maybe
Ugin.
Yeah, and maybe now is the time to have the discussion about some of them have some really cool ETB effects, right? Or even just the post ETB effects, right? You can talk about Dragonlord Ataka, pretty classic reanimate card. Talk about Glorybringer, right? Classic red aggro card. But there's so many of these cards that are just so mana intensive that Magic in general is kind of passing these things by.
Absolutely. All right, so that's the tie-off for all the things. What we did is we wanted to do an exploration of dragons. We wanted to kind of just go over a few of them, show how you can put them in buckets or silos, and look at them kind of from a more of an objective point of view, 40,000 feet, see which kind of archetypes they fit into. And then we wanted to come up with a system in place at which you would, the old Gnaw Bone Method, basically, that we could use as the basis of analyzing these cards to reiterate, if the questions were, is this dragon impactful when it enters the board? Does the cost translate to the effect provided? Win more versus is it truly needed? Is this card a finisher in my environment? Is it environmentally dependent? I.e., Old Gnaw Bones could be pretty exceptional in an environment which, caters to it, right? What archetypes does my dragon slate into? And then ask yourself as a curator and or as a player,
absolutely,
am I using my EDH brain when I'm giving feedback or making decisions, or am I using my cube brain?
Yeah.
Because this comes up a lot in our group. Other than that, I hope this has been a fun episode. We've kind of covered all things dragon. I'm going to ask Stu to carry us out into the outros.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, we appreciate all of our listeners, anyone who's reached out to us on the socials. Thank you so much for everybody who's chosen to take the time to hang out with us and listen to the podcast. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate you guys. We hit over 500 downloads not too long ago, which was super exciting for us. So again, thank you so much to everyone. If you'd like to reach out to us on Twitter, you can hit us up at UberCubeMTGPod. If you'd like to hit us up via email, we're available at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, we have the links to the Discord on our Twitter and show notes and
I'm also setting up a Patreon, by the way, that's going to have it's going to tether in merch, etc. So that's in works. That's coming soon.
I will say, I want to put this out there right now, as this was fairly recent to us, but Anthony, who is a quite talented artist, had decided that he wanted to put together a custom piece of art for the UberCube podcast. And he put together a bear, Uber Bear.
Angry bear.
I dig it so much. So I want to say, Anthony, thank you for your contribution to that.
Thank you, yeah.
It's a really,
I'm working
really
on
cool
T-shirts. I'm working on all these things. So we're going to have them coming out soon. I want to make stuff available to the community. It's fun. I love art, man. Anybody that knows me, I love art. Just everything. It allows me to express myself.
Just like you do with your kids.
Oh, my poor loved ones in my household. It's like dad's over there with crayons scratching stuff out all day long. But yeah, other than that, this has been a really fun episode.
It has. And and last but not least, if you have enjoyed this episode, just like any of the others, please feel free, give us a 5-star review on whatever your chosen podcast listening app is. We really appreciate it, and it goes a long way towards giving us exposure to other cube and possibly magic enthusiasts that might be able to find us.
Absolutely. All right, and other than that, I just want to say peace out and happy cubing.
Happy cubing.